So I'm about to say goodbye to Shetland and saying goodbye under mixed feelings. A lot of me doesn't want to leave here, but this is a place better suited, I think, to the people who are used to it. And on the return journey, I'm told that there's going to be extremely rough seas. Well, it's not as bad as it could be, but still, I guess my sea legs are going to be put to the test. I'll let you know how things go and catch up with you later. Leaving this isolated place behind was a morose experience for me, to say the least. It was uniquely and movingly beautiful, and so isolated from the rest of the world that you felt like, in many ways, you were on another planet. And indeed, the inhabitants were very different as well. Yes, humans like you and me, but humans with a different kind of motivation, a different set of priorities that don't include being within an easy journey of a major city, or indeed even a small city. And this was a remarkable experience, to say the least. But since then, I've been wondering, what happens if Saxavord does become as successful as they're hoping? What happens if a scrappy little launch provider from New Zealand, who have proven to be so successful up to this point, suddenly find themselves competing not against one launch provider, but 7, and launch providers that have a much more convenient spaceport to operate out of, at least for European satellite manufacturers? Is Rocket Lab going to suddenly find themselves in a competitive market where they really can't compete, and Neutron still years in the future? Is the opening of Saxavord something that I find to be such a good thing for the future of competitive spaceflight, actually going to staunch competition in the future? Now, before you go too much further, it's worth keeping in mind that this is actually part 3 of my series about Saxavord Spaceport. If you haven't seen part 1 or 2, I'd recommend you stop this video and go back and check out these videos linked right here and also in the description. But if you have already seen these episodes, it's worth keeping in mind that Saxavord, at least what they have planned in the future, is really going to change the face of commercial spaceflight when it comes to small sats, CubeSats, that sort of thing. Right now, there are very few launch providers like Rocket Lab that can offer a small sat provider an opportunity to launch when they want to the orbit that they want to, especially if they're polar orbits, and that sort of customizable launch plan that really SpaceX rideshare cannot provide. And Rocket Lab has earned a very good living off of that. As a matter of fact, NASA recently had them carry out an extremely important mission for the Artemis program, simply because it was a whole lot less expensive to do it through them than it would have been through SpaceX or any other provider. But what happens when you have lots of launch providers who can do the same thing for a lot less? And that's what's going to start happening at Saxavord. But before we get too far into that, let's resume my interview with the local manager about the unique community and environment that exists at this spaceport that really sets it apart. So I've noticed something about the culture. You folks have been generous enough and nice enough to invite me to dinner on a couple of nights now, as you guys all have dinner together in kind of in a common room and such. And it's also really neat to see that the CEO of the organization is eating in the same room with all the guys who've been working in the field. Tell me a little bit about that culture and what's involved with it.
I think that it's important that we can relax with every single member of the team, and it's really important that they see from the CEO down to the domestic staff on site being able to mix, and there's no barriers between us. And rather than working as a team, we're actually quite a big family, and that's what's our strong points, is that we all know each other inside and out. And if there are any issues at work, then they're dealt with very quickly. It's not a case of corporate law and things like that. We talk to each other and we communicate really well, and that's the basis of any good business. I think if you've got that communication with your staff, then they'll work for you and they'll do anything that they possibly can. And I think that shows in business. And if you've got that family ties and that family environment, then of course that's going to happen all the time.
So you guys are about to transition into a totally different world as well, obviously. I mean, you're going to have big American corporations coming here, of course, accustomed to doing things very differently, and all the way down to some of the smaller launch providers like, Sky Aurora and RFA and such. So are you kind of looking forward to introducing these big corporations to kind of your way of doing things?
Yeah, of course, of course. When you look at UNTS in a global market, you wouldn't dream of UNTS or Shetland being in that position. But to move on to the space industry, when somebody said to me he wanted to launch rockets from UNTS, I thought that he'd been on the happy juice. I'll be honest with you, because we were dealing with tourists and bird watchers and a very different part of the tourism gap within Shetland. And it was small, and then all of a sudden he said, we're going to go and launch some rockets and build a spaceport. We thought the guy had gone cuckoo, but it turned out that he was absolutely right, and here we are in this position that in the next 5 years it becomes a very international island and a very international community as well, because it helps schools, it helps every single person on this island benefit, and they will benefit, whether it's monetary or whether it's educational wise, and it's a great thing. I couldn't think of anywhere better to live than UNTS, and to see this develop.
Well, it's a really amazing island and certainly a fantastic community. Last question in regards to the community and their reaction to such a dramatic change happening here. I've had an opportunity to talk to a couple of people, and what I've heard from one person is she told me that people who are from here, people who've always lived here, they're actually very excited about what's happening here. It's just some of the people who have moved here, transitioned here, that may not be as excited. But she said the majority of people very much support what you guys are doing. How have you been contending with the challenge of some people who might be resistant to the notion of building a spaceport here?
I think it's all about the information that we give out to them, and it's certainly whenever you think of a rocket, you think of a nuclear rocket, or you think of something like that. But a rocket also carries information, and it carries satellites, it carries the technology that we need, and we can develop into being one of the world leaders. And to be perfectly honest, a lot of the younger generation on the island understand this more so than the older generation. And I think that what we call on the island Southmouthers, anybody, and me being one of them, anybody that comes onto the island or the islands tend to come here for a quieter lifestyle than what the hustle and bustle of the cities will bring. But there is also that in the hustle and bustle there is also change that doesn't affect people that much, and they don't notice it. Once they see the infrastructure being built, and once that's been built, then it will go back to being a very quiet island again. It won't impact too much on the. It will bring more jobs, and it will bring more transport to the island and more tourism. But overall, I don't think that it's going to impact on the sustainability of the island. And if anything, it's actually going to benefit more than any other islands have done.
Well, I'd agree with you completely there. My uncle worked at Cape Canaveral from the beginnings of operations at the start of the Apollo program all the way through. I spent a lot of time out in Florida, and I can attest to the positive developments that Cape Canaveral brought to that area as it developed. The area around all the launch pads is beautiful, natural, and actually wildlife preserves. Rare endangered species have been protected. Right next to those, and those are much bigger rockets than you're launching from here. So yeah, it's I'll tell you, the environment around Titusville and around the Cape is very positively impacted. So I can definitely see that here.
I think it's all about the change, and when people first see that there's change, some of them obviously don't like to see trucks coming up and down, and I think that's going to be there forever. And it's not. It's going to be here for a very short period of time. And as you say, around Cape Canaveral, you've got reserves, nature reserves and everything. And that's what we're trying to build up around at Lameness and Saxavord Spaceport. Is around there is the area itself is preserved. Okay, there will be launches that will take place, and there may be a little bit of disruption, but it was only for a very, very short period of time.
All right. Well, I'll tell you, what you're doing here is beautiful and unique and innovative, which is something that I always like to cover on my channel and to share that with the world. So thank you so much for your time.
Pleasure.
And for your hospitality.
Pleasure. No problem.
So I've covered a wide variety of launch providers in the course of this 3-episode series, but the one that I haven't covered yet is the one that I think is going to be the most formidable as far as Rocket Lab and everybody else is concerned, and that is Rocket Factory Augsburg. If they can indeed do what they told me they're going to be able to do in Paris, we're talking about 1.3 metric tons up to a 500-kilometer sun-synchronous orbit, 850 kilograms to a 2,000-kilometer polar orbit, 450 kilograms to a geosynchronous transfer orbit, and finally 150 kilograms all the way to the moon. This is something that the Electron can't hope to match. And so what happens as far as price is concerned? Well, again, according to RFA, their target is 5 million euros per launch, or roughly the same that the Electron costs, except with quadruple the payload. And also, of course, any European satellite manufacturers are going to have the flexibility of launching out of a European spaceport instead of transporting their cargo all the way down to New Zealand or perhaps to the United States, where Rocket Lab is going to start launching fairly soon. If this company can indeed do the things that they claim they're going to be able to do, this will be a complete game changer and something that would definitely put Rocket Lab on the back foot. So what does this mean? Is this actually likely to happen? Well, there are a lot of unknowns here. For one thing, RFA is making use of a lot of off-the-shelf components, something that's caused Astra a hell of a lot of problems. However, they are making use of the German automotive industry for a lot of these parts, companies that have a really good reputation for reliability, so it's hard to say what kind of results they're going to be able to get. But here's the most important thing. Rocket Lab has an established history of successful launches. We can expect at least the first RFA launch to fail, possibly the first couple of launches, which means they probably really won't get started with commercial launches until 2024, and they won't have an established reputation until 2025, and that is when Neutron is scheduled to come online. Peter Beck is not an idiot. Peter Beck has some very good plans in store for the future of his company, and by the time companies like RFA are able to put Electron on its back foot, Well, guess what? They've got a new launch vehicle that's going to change the whole landscape of spaceflight once again. Neutron, on a smaller scale, is every bit as revolutionary as Starship. It has reusability, it has 3D printed in-house components, it has a carrying capacity of 13 metric tons to low Earth orbit, and a 5-meter fairing, which means it's capable of carrying all of the current human-rated spacecraft and projected future human-rated spacecraft that we're using. Crew Dragon, Starliner, assuming that they really wanted to do that. And by the way, that would be the only way that Starliner could possibly be competitive, would be to launch on this rocket. And also Dream Chaser, any of the future human-rated launch vehicles can go up on this thing for less money than Falcon 9 charges. Again, a monumental change. And yes, Starship can carry up a whole lot more, complete reusability, etc. But Starship also requires a massive exclusion zone, a huge amount of fuel, and a lot of other complications that Neutron doesn't have. So really, Neutron in many ways is going to be a launch vehicle that's going to change the entire competitive landscape of spaceflight, at least for medium-sized launch vehicles. And I'll tell you, that's going to be at least 90% of the customers in the future. So no, Saxavord is not going to put Rocket Lab in any kind of trouble. Saxavord will simply provide a greater variety of choices for small-sat and CubeSat satellite manufacturers in the future, especially those in Europe. So hats off to you, Peter Beck, but you don't have to eat it. So as Lerwick slipped out of sight, I started to think less and less about spaceports and began to reflect a bit on just what had this journey meant for me. I have to admit, I felt sad to leave, but at the same time, this place doesn't belong to me. It belongs to the Shetlanders, people who are accustomed to this degree of harshness and isolation, the ongoing and endless howling winds combined with just a stunning natural beauty that's very difficult to match anywhere on the planet. As a matter of fact, I can definitely say that I've never seen a place like this, and I can understand why people fall in love with it, even though being so far isolated from cities, that's something that I could never adapt to. But I was also left wondering exactly what kind of change is Saxavord going to bring to this area. Obviously jobs, obviously a lot of industry, and not a great deal of damage given the fact that the spaceport is restricted to a small region. But at the same time, I also learned that this unique chain of islands is home to a wide variety of birds who really need it as a stop-off point during their migrations. For example, Northern European birds on their way to Africa, and also North American birds who are blown off course while flying over the Atlantic and end up in Shetland, even though that wasn't their original intention. This is such an isolated and protected place, one of the very few locations that doesn't actually have a great deal of human presence interfering with these creatures' natural habitat. What will happen when their world comes head-to-head with mine? What will become of them? Well, unfortunately, it does seem that it's not going to be a great deal different than it was 20 years ago when there was a large RAF base here. There were hundreds of military personnel, and these birds survived just fine under those circumstances, and I really don't foresee that Saxavord is going to be any more disruptive. I'm not saying that it won't be disruptive at all, but I am saying that it's something that they've adapted to in the past, and they should be able to adapt to this as well. As a matter of fact, it may not be nearly as bad given the fact that the local spaceport and its personnel live here. They care about this area, they care about the wildlife, they care about everything staying as lovely and tranquil and idyllic as the environment that they grew up in. That's what makes this place so unique and makes the people who live and work here such a joy to be around. I have to admit, I was sad to make my departure, but at the same time, this is definitely not the kind of place that I would flourish in. And as a matter of fact, heading back, I encountered some problems as well. So, yeah, the weather has gotten significantly worse, although not nearly as bad as it supposedly can. As you can see, there's absolutely nothing you can see out there, but the ship is rocking tremendously, as you can maybe notice in the background. But I have secured myself to a firm piece of, I don't know, I think it's a water pipe or something like that here on the aft deck. And just thank God I don't feel sick, but the pods where I'm in, I don't have a cabin this time. Those pods are like a plague house right now. A lot of people vomiting and such, so all I can say is I'm grateful that I'm not in that situation and feel bad for them. We'll see what happens. Well, although I didn't get a lot of sleep, I obviously did get back safely, and I want to thank everybody at Saxavord for their hospitality and a really unique experience, and thank all of you for tuning in. Please like, please subscribe, and as always, stay angry about space!